Okay. All right. Well, everybody, Brona, Cindy, Deanna, and Steve, welcome to this meetup group. We have a special guest tonight, Melissa Hergert, who is the CEO of Brain Train Centers, board certified in neurofeedback, and Amen Brain Health Coach. She has owned Brain Train since 2013 and has grown to multiple offices across the country. She offers consulting for others, neurofeedback providers, as well as coaching course for anyone that wants to understand the brain better from a neurofeedback perspective. Ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome you, Melissa Hergert. Here she is, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome,
Thank
welcome.
you. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here and share a little bit of my story and what I do. My big goal is to make sure everyone learns about neurofeedback if they don't know about it. So should I share my screen now? Would that be good?
However you want to do it. This is
Okay. Okay, I'm going to share my screen um, and then, I'm totally open to discussion, especially with a great small group like this. That's always fun. And my show's not very long for this slideshow. Are you seeing it okay? Yes. Okay. Okay. Yes, I am Melissa Hergert. These are my why. These are kind of a little bit older pictures, but Mila on the left here is now 12 years old. Elliot is now 4. These are my 2 girls, and they're not my only why, but I am a mom, and I'll get further into what neurofeedback helps with. But a big reason I love this so much is because our children are over medicated nowadays. And I know that if I were to take my children to the pediatrician, say they can't focus or whatever the issue may be, they're going to immediately try to put them on medication. And I'm not against medication. I don't want anyone to think that. I think it's appropriate at certain times, but it's definitely overdiagnosed. A lot of things are overdiagnosed, misdiagnosed, and medication is thrown to fix things. And neurofeedback is a great way to help our brains heal without first going to medication or possibly doing both. So that's why they're a big part of my why, is just I want them to have the healthiest life possible and succeed in everything they do. So who I am, the teal part is my married name, but I'm not with their dad anymore. He's a wonderful man. We're still friends, but my name is Melissa Hergert. I am board certified. I did start my company back in 2013, so almost 10 years, and I knew I wanted to grow it. So at first, I actually grew a full wellness center. So I had chiropractic, acupuncture, massage, neurofeedback, and then I started to feel more like a landlord versus someone that was providing a health service. So at the time, it was called Be Wellness Center, and I decided to close it down and rebrand to my company now, which is Brain Train Centers. There was nothing wrong. It's just I needed to rebrand and refocus and really focus just on the neurofeedback because that's my passion. I originally went to chiropractic school at Life University here in Atlanta, Georgia. It's one of the best chiropractic schools. But I decided a year into it that I didn't want to be a chiropractor. But that's where all of my experience came from, was chiropractic college or chiropractic assistant jobs. So what I did was found a chiropractor after I stopped going to chiropractic school, found a chiropractor, and he ended up having neurofeedback in his office. So that's how I was introduced to neurofeedback therapy. I'll get into it more, what all of that is, but I just want to kind of share how I got into it. Amen Clinics is a world-renowned doctor, Dr. Amen. He's been on PBS since 30, 40 years ago, I'm pretty sure. He is a psychiatrist, so he can prescribe drugs, but he would rather figure out what's going on in the brain. And his whole career started with neurofeedback. He now does something called SPECT scans, which is similar to an MRI, but it shows a little bit more information like the electric signals and the blood flow. And he educates the world that a lot of our brain or mental health issues are because of traumatic brain injuries that have been undetected, or sleep issues. So people travel from all over the world to his clinics, which he has, I think 6 or 7 throughout the US. And he also offers a health coaching certification for people like me that want to have that in their back pocket for their own reasons. So I did do that during COVID. I got brain health certified through the Amen clinics, have a master's in addiction counseling, and an exercise science degree from Life University. I originally started at San Diego State, but I finished at Life University. So that's who I am. My business now is in a model of similar to a franchise, but it's not a franchise. I own three offices 100%. I have 2 offices that are partnered, like 50-50, and then the rest of them are actually licensed out. So people are now buying into Brain Train Centers as a licensed business, and I provide a turnkey system for people to open up offices. So we have offices all the way from Oahu, Hawaii, to San Diego, Texas, St. Louis, Florida, South Carolina, Georgia, Delaware, and next month we're opening Oklahoma and Minnesota. Were you going to say something, Dan?
We have a question from Steve. He wants to know what a SPECT scan is.
Yes, a SPECT scan is similar to an MRI. So you do go in this tube, and they do have to inject some type of fluid to be able to see both the deep structures of the brain and the surface electric signals of the brain. So that's what is provided at the Amen clinics. I don't do those. You have to be a medical doctor, but that's what the Amen clinics do. And so it shows a lot more than what I'm going to talk about today, what I do, which is called a QEEG. I'll get into that in a minute, but it does show a lot of information, including old brain injuries and how the deep structures are affected. And you have MS. So yeah, neurofeedback has some research that shows help with MS, some of the symptoms. So maybe we could even talk privately, Steve, how we could get you some help with the brain too, if you're interested. So, okay, I'm going to go to the next slide. Let's see, what do I have here? Why isn't it going? Okay, so here's what I'm going to talk about. What do we do at Brain Train Centers? First, let me just give you a quick history of neurofeedback therapy. Neurofeedback was created back in the 1960s, and it was created for seizure disorders. So they did research on cats, on animals, and they found out that if you can retrain a specific brain activity at the top of your brain where the sensory motor strip is, that you could actually decrease or completely get rid of seizures based off this neurofeedback training. I'm going to describe more what the neurofeedback training is. So it was created back in the 1960s. A lot of research has been done at big universities. They use it in the military out in Camp Pendleton of San Diego. So it's used in high-level athletes, peak performance, focus, all of that. So what we start with is something called a QEEG, and it stands for quantitative electroencephalogram. What that means is we're recording the brain activity that's going on in the brain while you're awake, kind of like a sleep study, but you're awake. So we have you close your eyes for our software specifically does 9 minutes with your eyes closed, 9 minutes with your eyes open. So we record that brain activity in 12 different areas of the brain to figure out what's going on. Is your brain firing too fast in certain areas? Is it firing too slow? Why are you dealing with the symptoms you're dealing with? And then we provide the neurofeedback, which I'll explain in a little bit. And this is provided as a solution for neurological symptoms for children as young as 5 is what we work with, all the way up to elderly. The oldest I've worked with is 86. So every age in between there. Okay. So here are the problems that we address. I'm not allowed to diagnose. I'm not a doctor, but if I were a psychiatrist, I could use a QEEG to help with diagnosis to determine which medication might be needed or provide another therapy. Here's the thing. We get our checkups every year, right? We go and get our annual checkups, and we check our heart rate and our blood pressure and blood work and all of that, right? How many actually check their brain and how it's functioning every year? Probably no one you know of. And I'm sure you haven't done this like on a normal basis, but the brain controls everything in our body. Our central nervous system, which controls everything, our brain and our spine are connected, and it all controls everything in our body, not just our mental health, but how our muscles function, how we move, how we feel and taste. So the problem is a lot of people have, how many of you experience any of these symptoms or feel like you have these symptoms? ADHD is one that everyone says they have, right? Insomnia, migraines, concussions, depression, especially over COVID time, all the anxiety and depression that was popping up everywhere and even in our younger children. And what do most people usually do is go to the counselor or the doctor and get a medication, because that's what our society is told to do. There's so many other options, not just neurofeedback, but our diet, our exercise, all these wonderful things that we could do to help our brains and our bodies function better. But neurofeedback does specifically help with these symptoms. Again, I can't diagnose them, but it can help decrease or eliminate a lot of the symptoms that are listed here. Okay. And even some like Steve, MS and Parkinson's. We have a lot of research on Parkinson's using neurofeedback to help with symptoms of that as well. So how does neurofeedback work? The goal of neurofeedback is to transform any unhealthy or dysregulated brain patterns to help them become more normal or organized patterns. When you do this, the brain becomes more stable and is able to operate optimally and efficiently. So this is the way I describe neurofeedback. On the screen here, the picture, that's of a session, a completed session of neurofeedback therapy. So I wish I had like a video or something to show you, but I'm going to explain it the best I know. Maybe some of you back in the day learned in Psychology 101 about operant conditioning, and it was Pavlov's dogs, and he would ring the bell, they would salivate, and he would provide them with food. And what happens is the brain works on a reward system. No matter what, that's how our brains work. We love rewards. Our brain loves rewards. So every time your brain goes into a pattern that we need to increase or decrease, and it's based off of sensors that are on your head, the software is picking up the pathways, the neuroelectric pathways. It's feeding that to the software, and the software is then feeding a positive or negative feedback on the screen in front of you. So the client will actually sit in the chair at our office. They'll watch their favorite show, their favorite movie, and every time their brain goes into a pattern that we want more of, the screen in front of them will turn nice and bright and the volume will be loud. As soon as the brain patterns go into a negative pattern, or a dysregulated pattern is what we call it, then the screen will go dark and the volume will go down. So what this is called is a closed loop of feedback directly controlled by the brain activity. I hope this is making sense to you guys. And you can go on my website and actually watch a 2-minute video of me hooking a child up to do a neurofeedback session, and you'll understand it a little bit better. But the whole goal is to help the brain learn new patterns and new pathways to use, so symptoms will then decrease and your brain works as a better operating system. So another way I describe it is, our brain is like the hardware of your computer, and your mind, which a lot of people put the two together, but they're actually, in a lot of neuroscientists' opinion, are separate, but they do work together. The brain is like the hardware and the mind is like the software. So if your hardware is not processing properly, all the stuff that we want to download, like the great things like counseling, coaching, gratitude, journaling, that might take a while if your brain can't process it properly. So neurofeedback helps us train the brain to process in a logical, healthy, emotional way. So then when you do start to do all the mind work, it works better and faster. Because have you ever heard of someone go to like a counselor for like 10 years? That happens. And a lot of times it's not like the counselor's fault. It's usually because the client cannot process all the great tools that the counselor is giving them to deal with their anxiety or depression, or they're just so stuck in that same negative pattern of depression or anxiety or lack of focus that they actually do really need a feedback to help get them out of that loop. Think of feedback, biofeedback, neurofeedback. We wear watches every day that tell us our heart rate and our stress levels now, like Apple Watches and things like that. They could tell us like your heart beats a little bit fast. It shouldn't be because you're sitting there. That's feedback to how our body is functioning. So the more feedback we give to ourselves about ourselves, the more changes we can make. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So that's the neurofeedback. Here's what it looks like for someone to be getting a QEEG. It is comprehensive. It just allows us to read the brain activity. Where those white dots are, we put some electrode gel into those holes, and that's just to help pick up the frequency of the brain activity. Okay, and that just helps us say, okay, this area of the brain's working too fast, this area of the brain's working too slow. I'm going to tell you, it's not on here, but I'm going to tell you guys something. A lot of people think they have ADHD, and when they say that, and maybe you've said this, I have ADHD, my brain never shuts down. And that's actually incorrect. There's different types of focus issues, but if you have classic ADHD, it's usually because your brain is working too slow. The hyperactivity comes from the brain wanting stimulation. So people will look around, they'll click their pin, they'll tap their feet, they'll move around, to make their leg go up and down. That's because the brain is working too slow. It's actually in sleepy mode, and you're trying to stimulate the brain naturally by making movements like that. ADHD meds are actually stimulant drugs. They're methyl drugs that stimulate the brain to go into a faster pattern, so then you can pay attention. So when someone says they can't focus, they can't shut their brain down, that's usually anxiety with a focus issue. Okay, so just that alone, understanding how your brain works can help you determine what you need to perform better, whether it's you owning a business or at your job, whatever it may be. So wouldn't you want to know how your brain's functioning so you could improve? I think a lot of us would want to know that. So that's what the QEG does. At our offices, you could come get a QEG and never do neurofeedback if you don't want to. The QEG alone is going to give you so much information. I've had clients that just want to come do that, and then they wanted to do kind of like their own case study and go do yoga for a year, go do meditation for a year, and then come back a year later and see how much the brain has changed. So it's not that you have to commit to neurofeedback if you come to us. We're going to recommend it though, usually, if it's something we can help with. So yeah, here's just like an infographic of the process of the neurofeedback. So very simple to understand. You put the sensors on the head. It's picking up the brain activity. They do not shock you. They don't send electric signals, or they're just sensors picking up the electric signals from your brain, feeds it to the software in real time. Then the software provides the audiovisual feedback to reinforce the positive brain activity. And over time, these sensory rewards train the brain to create new habits of electrical activity. If you all are interested in reading an awesome book that I'm actually reading with my women's mastermind group right now, is called Atomic Habits. And if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. And in the first 2 chapters, it talks just about this, like how everything's a feedback in our life. And even small changes over time create large changes in our life. So that's what neurofeedback does. Now, neurofeedback is done over time. I'm going to talk about it in another slide. It is not a one-time fix. It's not a magic pill. So it is something that you have to do just like exercise, but you don't have to do it forever. I'll get to that slide in a second, I think. Let's see. Why isn't it going? There we go. So I kind of already said this. When you have information on what your brain waves are doing, your brain can use that information to change how it works. Just like when we get feedback from our watch, we could take some deep breaths, we could calm down to decrease our heart rate. That's biofeedback. Neurofeedback is a form of biofeedback, and we use biofeedback at a lot of places now, and people don't even realize that that's what it is. Okay. Let's see. Once we learn something and we've done it over and over, those habits over and over, it does become, I don't like to say permanent because some things could happen. I'm going to say long-term part of our behavior, hopefully permanent if it's a good habit or if it's a good way our brain works. There have been studies about neurofeedback that shows the efficacy up to 30 years later. So what a bunch of research did was did fMRIs, did neurofeedback, and then 30 years later did fMRIs again and saw those pathways that were created even there 30 years later. Now, things can happen when you do neurofeedback. Things can happen like if you get in a horrible car accident or a very traumatic experience, can affect the brain in a negative way, and you may need to return and do neurofeedback again. But overall, it is proof, there is proof that neurofeedback does create long-term changes in the brain. Here's a bunch of neurofeedback books and research. And if you want, I could even send this to you, Dan, if you wanted to send it out. But you can look up neurofeedback everywhere. Just like any other therapy, there are going to be sides for it and sides against it. And, you know, a lot of the big pharma doesn't want to get insurance involved with covering things like this. So it is, for the most part, there are some offices across the country that I don't own that are maybe provided by a different software or different provider that they might be able to bill insurance, especially if it's a doctor providing it. And usually it has to be a specific diagnosis for that insurance to cover it. But there is a lot of research. It's growing and growing. It's this field is still, even though it's been around since the 60s, that's still pretty young when it comes to all of the evolution of it that we can see happen over the next few years. So I expect to see some big changes and a lot more people learning about it throughout these next 10 years. Yeah, if Big Pharma fights it, that means it works. That's true. Absolutely. Yeah. Let's see what I have next. There we go. Okay, so here's some common questions on neurofeedback. How often do I train? So research shows, and I really like to always go back to the research, and I know some research can be skewed, but for the most part, a lot of the research is done within like colleges and universities that aren't like backed by the Neurofeedback Society or anything, you know, so there's no reason to skew the data. But it shows that 40 sessions is usually the most common to create a long-term change in most people. Now, depends on trauma, medication, age. It may be more than that. And then I even have some people that just love it so much that they just continue for a very long time because they want to get to the peak performance. They're high achiever, peak performance type of clients. For most part, most people come to our offices for about 30 to 40 sessions, usually are done, or they might come in for a tune-up like 6 months later, 1 or 2 sessions, but it's not mandatory. 30 sessions is what we do require clients to commit to, because here's the thing, you don't want to have someone start neurofeedback and do like 10 sessions and they have this great results even within 10 sessions, which is very possible, and then they'll stop neurofeedback, and that's not going to create the long-term change. We know from research it does need to be a certain amount of sessions. The sessions have to come a minimum of 2 times a week, but they could come every day. You could do this just like exercise. And in fact, we have home units that we mail across the country to people that can do neurofeedback daily up to 2 times a day. So depending on finances, availability, all that, there's different options, but it's safe to actually train every day. we do monitor that because the brain does get tired, and we don't want people to waste training if their brain is too fatigued. Kind of like going to the gym, you don't want to go work out too hard, or else maybe that workout would not be beneficial because your body and muscles haven't recovered enough from the previous workout, right? So the same for brain training. We do monitor to make sure that the brain's not fatigued. Each session usually is really about 30 minutes. We've done up to 45 minutes. And most people see changes between 5 to 8. Some take a little bit longer to see changes, depending again on age, medication, all of that. So I would better safely say between 12 to 15 is where a lot of good changes really start to show up. Kids react very quickly to this. Their brains are like little sponges, and they don't try to control everything like us adults do. So they just love coming into the therapy, and it's fun. They get to watch their favorite show, and their brain's controlling like the TV. So they think it's really cool, you know. So it's a fun therapy, and it's safe. As far as I know, there are no negative side effects. What happens, it's hard to say that, but the reality is when you change your brain and the way it's firing, it gets out of its comfort zone of how it's been working for a long time, whether that be anxiety. It's not very comfortable, but that's what the brain is used to. And what happens when you start to change those patterns, some symptoms can either start to show up that they've never had before, or some feel like they're getting worse before they get better. That's actually a normal thing that happens with neurofeedback, not with everyone. And it's kind of like peeling an onion back. Some people may have insomnia, and then we start doing neurofeedback and they start feeling panic or anxiety, but that's the core issue of why they probably had insomnia. So as we're starting to train and peel those layers back, we're getting to the deeper subconscious emotional levels that then we have to work on that better as well, enhance emotional regulation by retraining with neurofeedback. So those are some of the questions that I get, is how long, how often. We do a mid-therapy, mid-training QEG and post-training QEG to see the changes in the brain from start to finish as well. And people love that. This is from a neurologist from Harvard Medical, and it's one of my favorite quotes to back neurofeedback because it's a medical doctor, a pediatrician, and he said neurofeedback should play a major therapeutic role in many difficult areas. In my opinion, if any medication had demonstrated such a wide spectrum of efficacy, it would be universally accepted and widely used. So that's my mission and goal, is to get neurofeedback universally known about to start off, and then accepted and widely used everywhere within prisons, within drug rehab centers, within schools, within all these areas, because the better we can improve our brain health, the better I think the whole universe can be, in my opinion. I believe that might be it. I didn't mention this, and I should have at the beginning. I also have a nonprofit for veterans and first responders, and we do provide cost-free neurofeedback to our veterans and first responders that have been diagnosed with PTSD or traumatic brain injuries. Those usually go hand in hand. So it's called Healing Our Heroes, and we started it 6 years ago out in San Diego. California State is kind of a mess when it comes to the state secretary office. So we had to move it to Nevada State, and we're relaunching it just to make sure our 501c3 status stays positive and everything like that. But we do have that, and our offices around the country all do not get paid. They are volunteer. When it comes to Healing Our Heroes, like if they take a veteran on that they want to help give back to, they don't receive any money for it or anything. The nonprofit just uses the funds to pay like for the software and things like that. So it's what's considered a 95% nonprofit. So no one's getting a salary or anything like that. So I guess that's it. I mean, are there questions? Do you want to talk, Dan, or?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was really interesting. the question that kept coming to my mind was when you're doing the neurofeedback, like the one slide that you showed, it showed like the 1, 2, 3, 4, like the circle, like
Yeah.
the over time, these sensory rewards train the brain. Like, I guess I'm curious to know, like you showed like ADHD, you showed different types of things that it treats. Now, I know you can't diagnose it, but I guess you send the reports to, I guess, a psychologist or whatever that they're working with. And do they come up with a treatment plan, or do they come back to you and they like, I don't know like how it works. Is it like shock therapy? Like, how does
No.
it work?
Well, if it's okay, I could actually share the 2-minute video since that was pretty fast. So here's the thing. Um, I'm board certified in neurofeedback. So when we do the initial QEEG, I interpret that. So I'm trained and at the level where I can interpret it, but we can't use it for diagnosis. Now, if I do know a psychiatrist that is trained in reading QEEG reports, then he or she can use the QEEG report to diagnose as part of the diagnosis. That doesn't happen very often. And in fact, we actually get referrals from psychiatrists, psychologists for their clients to come to us for neurofeedback. So they're not looking to really offer the service. There are some that do. Though those are just partnerships that we create within those fields. Yeah.
So
So
what
we
is it? So what exactly is it looking at? Like, I know there's theta, beta, gamma, different
yeah,
all waves, brain waves that you're actually looking at.
yeah.
And I guess how is that like interpreted? And then how do you come up with a treatment plan? Do you say, oh, this person's in theta most of the time when they should be in beta, and we need to like stimulate their brain somehow?
Yeah, and we don't
Or
stimulate it. Yeah. Here, I'm going to share my screen. And what I'm going to do is show you a sample report of a QEEG so you guys could kind of see what it looks like. And then I'll kind of describe that. Hold on, let me pull this up.
because it makes me want to get my brain scanned to
Right?
see what's if it's functioning properly. Like, I want to know like what are some of the things that you would see, like I'm in high stress, or like
Yeah.
I'm
Exactly. So what happens? We record the brain activity, we upload it to a database where it's compared to normal and abnormal brain activity map. They're called brain maps for short. And then it shows that it gives us this full report that you see on the screen here. Are you seeing it okay?
yep.
Yep. So then it shows us this is what's called the dashboard page. First, it shows us the 4 areas of the brain that we call most dysregulated. It's kind of like going to a personal trainer at the gym and they say, well, we need to strengthen your core and back before you lose 30 pounds, right? So we're saying, all right, these are these core issues. What areas are lighting up to need the most work first, right? So that's what those red dots are. Over here, these meters are what we call probability meters of dysregulation. And you just mentioned theta, delta, alpha, beta. Those are the brain activities that we record. So for example, this person has 100% beta dysregulation, which means her brain is completely over aroused, which means she's probably dealing with anxiety, irritability, fight or flight. We do take a full history. Even if I didn't have any paperwork and I open up a brain map, I could tell you everything that this person's experiencing just from being able to see. So here's where the fun part is. See all this? That's what correlates to symptoms. This is showing magnitude of brain activity. This is the person's actual brain electric signals, but in color form for us to be able to understand it better. Because if we just look at a bunch of squiggly lines, nobody would understand that. So it puts it into this color form. And what we want to see across this row is gray. We want to see healthy areas of the brain. That means the magnitude of each brain activity is working in the proper zones that they should be. All this blue is low and very low according to where the normal should be for this person. So this could mean anything from like a head injury, like bad memory, short-term memory issues, emotional trauma. So all of these correlate to something. I'm not going to go through all of them, but when we do our report of finding, that's what we discover. We say like, oh, okay, well, this red in the back is most likely why you're dealing with rumination issues, like you can't let things go, or negative thoughts, and you're having bad dreams, because the back of your brain that controls that is lit up red. So that confirms for us and for the client the symptoms they're dealing with. And sometimes we might see things that the client may not even be dealing with or experiencing, but the brain is functioning this way. So if you don't make a change, if this 27-year-old girl doesn't change her brain function for the better, then when she's 40, she might actually start experiencing the insomnia and things like that, right? You just keep letting it go. It's going to get worse as you get older. And then we see the asymmetry of the brain left to right. And technically her right side of her brain, what this means down here, the asymmetry, the right side of her brain is completely over aroused, 100% flipped is what we call it. And that means that there's probably extreme anxiety, extreme irritability, a lot of emotional dysregulation, hard to control emotions, things like that. So that's kind of things that we go over in the report of finding. Okay. And then if it's okay, I'll just share real quick the quick 2.5-minute video so you can actually see how the therapy works. And it's just me explaining it and then showing how it works on a child in one of our offices. So let me just pull that up really quick. I'm going to stop sharing until I go get it.
Yeah, because that's what I'm curious to see. Like, once you have that data, what do you do after that in the 40 sessions? Like you had 20 to 60, 40 sessions, what goes on in those 40 sessions to change that red to gray, right? Because you want gray.
Exactly. Or more towards normalization for sure. And it
Right.
doesn't always go gray. The goal is not to get everything gray, because we live in a world full of toxins and emotions. So, but the goal is to get the brain as close to the gray or most of it gray, just like you said. And so here's what actually happens. I'm going to make it big, and then, oops, wait, I should have shared it first. And then I'll share this. And I'll share the sound. I don't know if we still have to click on that. It's not letting me. Well, hopefully you guys could hear it. Let's see. And then, so this is just a quick video of me in one of our offices in Marietta, Georgia. One of the most common questions I get is, what is neurofeedback?
Yeah.
So I'd like to take a couple minutes to explain what it looks like when someone does neurofeedback at our office. A person comes in and they're ready to get started with training. So they sit comfortably in our recliner chair and watch the screen in front of them, watching their favorite show, their favorite movie, anything that their brain enjoys watching. As they watch the screen, the brain wave is going to control the feedback on that screen. As the brain gets into the correct pattern, the screen in front of them is nice and bright. Okay. But do you see how that screen just went dark on the TV? You'll see the little girl in the chair is actually controlling the bright and darkness of that TV with brain activity. Okay, so that's the actual therapy. I'm going to keep pressing. Every time the brain goes into a negative pattern that we do not want to happen anymore, the screen turns black and the volume goes down. This is giving the brain a live time feedback to work in a new pattern by giving it a positive reinforcement on the screen in front of them. As the brain gets more information on how it's working, it's able to change the way it works with positive reinforcement and creates neuroplasticity in the brain. When the person comes in, they sit down and I clean the area of the scalp that we put the sensors on. The sensors do not send any electric signals, and they are not shocking or magnets or anything like that. All they are sensors picking up the brainwave activity. So I clean the area of the scalp, and simply with some 10-20 paste, it's just in a conductor paste that we put on the scalp and place the sensors in that area. We add ear clips to help with grounding to make sure that we don't pick up any outside electric signals. So this is where we get that information coming from the brain that controls the loop of feedback for that client. When a person is ready to stop. Okay, that part is just saying you have to commit to 30. Did that make a little more sense seeing it? Okay, so it's non-invasive. You're not getting electric shocks. You're not getting magnets. You're not getting stimulated necessarily, except for the audio visual that's happening. So they wear headphones, the volume goes up and down, and the screen goes bright and dark. The whole time they're sitting there trying to watch their favorite show or movie. Now, the reason we let them watch a show or movie is because we want a positive reward. Like, we want them to pay attention. So it's got to be something they enjoy. I'm not going to put on a documentary for someone, for a 5-year-old that wants to watch, you know, Smurfs or something, right? So that's just part of the positive reinforcement. Back in the day when neurofeedback just began, they would sit there and they would have like a sensor on. It was actually just one sensor at the time. And every time their brain went into the correct pattern, a light bulb would turn on. And it was a feedback loop. So that's pretty boring. You don't want to just sit and watch a light bulb turn on and off, right? And the goal is that it becomes a new pathway, but it's not something you can control. Just like it with Pavlov's dogs, they salivated when they heard the bell ring because the reward that was presented with the bell ringing was food, which made them salivate. So it's actually taking things that we think we don't have control over, like our brainwave activity, and it's allowing us to develop new behavior in the brain at a subconscious level is the best way to describe it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I'm curious to know, like I did a meetup last night on trauma. And certain people have like trauma from their childhood, like maybe their parent died when they were like 6, and they still have trauma from that. Like, and the parent, you know, they just for some reason can't get over something like that. How does biofeedback help with something like that to break a pattern of that?
Exactly. And that's exactly what it's doing. It's breaking the pattern or actually creating a new pattern. It's not going to get rid of the trauma. It's not going to make them forget. The goal of neurofeedback is to help the brain process better. So again, we see a lot of veterans and first responders and people that have seen a lot of trauma in their life firsthand or even caused some of that, right? And a lot of people with trauma, they don't want to talk about it, especially men, and they don't want to relive it. And so this actually is a very safe, non-invasive way for them to allow their brain to process it and create new pathways that just allows the emotions that come with it become almost more of a logical processing. So that's how it helps a little bit better. And again, it's not going to get rid of it. A lot of people that come to us that do have trauma, we don't require it, but we highly recommend that they be with a counselor, because when your brain does start to process better, some emotions do really bubble up. And I'm not equipped to counsel like in that way. So I do let people know, like I have partners that are counselors nearby. Because when your brain does actually start to process it, that's when talking about it might become a little bit easier for the person as well. Yeah.
But what would an adult who was like someone with PTSD, what would they be watching to help build the new neural pathway or help them process something like that?
So that's up for debate, because in the neurofeedback community of providers, some people say it doesn't matter. If the person wants to watch war movies and they're a veteran, and even though wars might have caused some of their trauma, it's okay if they want to watch that. Me personally, I would not want them to watch that. I would rather them watch something lighthearted like The Office, or, you know, like one of those types of shows where it's like lighthearted, positive. But it is important that whatever the person chooses, it's something they enjoy, because that's what keeps their attention. Yeah, so they could watch anything. Yeah. So at our offices, we stream everything, so they could go on Netflix, Hulu, YouTube, Disney Plus, all of that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to ask all the questions. So anybody in the attendees box there, Barku, Brona, Cindy, Deanna, Justin, Steve, Thaisa, Milo. I hope I pronounced that right. That was a hard one. If you have any questions, you could type it in the Q&A, and we'll make sure that your questions get answered. Well, in the meantime, while they're thinking of questions, where can they find you if they want more information
Yeah. So,
about
and
this?
if you do you want me to put in the chat? I'm going to put my website.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the best way. And it also lists all of our locations. All the locations are trained professionals to provide neurofeedback the best they can, right? They're trained to
Uh-huh.
do it. Um, I'm located in Georgia. I actually am not in the offices very much anymore. I have trained technicians that work in my offices. I'm now opening offices all over. And I will mention this, that all my partners are women-owned businesses. And so that's kind of what I'm sticking to right now, not against the men, but women get shit done. So as of right
any
now,
any plans for the Northeast?
yeah, I mean, right now, so technically my Delaware is the furthest northeast I am right now, and it's in limbo right now. We are looking to move out of the Georgetown area of Delaware up to Dover, Delaware. I do have, I'm having talks with someone in the Philadelphia area, Doylestown. Don't know where that is, but I do also, I will say this, you don't have to come to me. I have colleagues. So if any of the listeners on here are interested in getting a QEG done, please let me know. And I could look according to your zip code for a colleague that I trust that I could refer you to. You don't have to come to a brain trained centers. I would rather you get a brain assessment done by getting a QEG from someone in your area. And if you wanted to, you could still work with me as a provider by using one of our home units, and just know that you're in good hands. That way we teach you how to use it. So even though you saw the video of what happens in the office, the same thing you can do right in the comfort of your own home. And we have a neurofeedback kit that we send to you, and you do it all on the system that we send you. And so that's another opportunity as well.
We have a question from Brona.
And why is watching? Okay. So, okay, the actions, it's an audio, it's a feedback. So it doesn't, anything could be on the screen. The show is just because it keeps people interested in looking at the screen. We don't want the screen to just be blank and then it go bright and dark. The actual feedback is the brightness of the screen and the volume that coincides with that. So what it's doing, oh, what's the best, how can I describe this? My best example is like when you're wearing your Apple Watch or your Fitbit and it tells you your heart rate, and then you change something to decrease or increase your heart rate. So neurofeedback's doing the same exact thing, but it's your brain waves, and it's not necessarily like, you can't say to your brain, okay, focus, and it automatically just go focus. It's actually needs some sort of feedback, which is the audio and the visual feedback that's actually changing the brain function. Because when your brain gets information, think of it like it recalibrates itself because it wants to watch the screen more. It wants to be able to see the screen. So the brain's going to take the information that when it was bright, however the brain was working to keep the screen bright, the brain's going to try to do more of that naturally, because that's how our brains work. When we get congratulated for doing something, or our kids are learning to use the potty, right, and get out of diapers, and you give them candy or treats or do a happy dance, those are all positive reinforcements to create more of that behavior. That's exactly what we're doing with neurofeedback. It's just using audio visual instead of a happy dance or candy. I hope that makes sense. Can neurofeedback help with addictions like sugar, for instance? Sugar is the most addictive substance out there. It's horrible. Oh, caffeine might be worse. Well, not worse, but anyways, neurofeedback can help with addiction. There's actually quite a few addiction centers more on the side of drugs and alcohol, but even with food addiction, we still do it the same way. We still do neurofeedback the same way, whether you have addiction or not. A lot of people have addiction because they have low dopamine, and it shows up in the brain that way. We could actually see when someone has low dopamine, and they're always looking for the next hit of something, whether that's sugar, porn, alcohol, drugs, shopping. And what happens is we like increase that dopamine, and then it goes way down. So we're like, oh, we want more dopamine again. And then we do that behavior again to make it spike. And then it keeps going up and down, up and down. It's very unhealthy for the brain, unfortunately. But that's what we see on the brain maps, is that low dopamine. I am working with a lady out in California who has had a lot of trauma. Everyone's had a lot of trauma, and you can't compare one trauma to another, because someone could be from a really, really tough background, and their trauma seems way worse than a kid whose parents got divorced. But that's a big trauma to that kid who had a healthy home and their parents got divorced. Those traumas still affect the brain the same way, even though one might sound way worse, being beaten, things like that, right? But what was my whole point of that? I forget. Oh, I'm working with a lady out in California, and she came to me because she wanted to lose weight. I can't promise that she's going to lose weight from doing neurofeedback, but what I can promise is that emotionally she will start to regulate herself better, and then not go to food as the addiction pattern to deal with her stress from the trauma. So that's exactly what's happened. And it's taken her some time because she's a bit older, had medication. So we had to work with all of that. But she now has lost 30 pounds. But that's because she now can regulate emotions better and not go to food for comfort. So yes, neurofeedback's amazing for addiction. One of my very first clients here in Georgia was a 21-year-old heroin addict, and his mom works at Emory University, which is an amazing hospital university here in Atlanta. And her neurologist that she worked for told her to find a neurofeedback provider, and they came across me. I was still pretty new to it, so I'm surprised they chose me. But they did come to me, and this was about 7 years ago, and he's still clean. And he had never been clean for more than a year. He had been doing drugs and alcohol since he was like 15. So things like that are pretty exciting, because what's happening is the brain can now function better. Impulse control becomes better. So yeah, it's amazing. I'm actually presenting to a drug rehab center in May down in Daytona about adding neurofeedback to their services. So that's a big one for me, because I come from a family full of addicts. I'm the only one in my family to actually own a business or not get addicted to drugs. And so it's a big part of my heart is addiction. So yeah. Any other questions? How do the electrodes stimulate the brain? They don't. That's the thing though. They don't. They're just picking up the electric signals in the brain. So we're not stimulating the brain, we're giving it a feedback only. So the sensors that we put on the head, they're just pasted on with some electric paste. And it sounds like electrocution, right? But it's not. We just paste them on, and that electric paste helps as a conductor to get the activity that we're trying to monitor from the brain. And then that is feeding to the software, and the software is feeding to the screen in front of the client. So it's just a closed loop, all controlled by the client's brain activity.
So when you say like a child, for instance, when they're watching a movie and when the screen goes black, something is like happening that shouldn't be happening.
Yes, the brain.
And really,
yeah.
Go ahead. The brain is what?
It's not, maybe it's not focused enough. Like, let's say it's a kid who has focus issues. Every time their brain goes into that pattern of unfocused, that's when the screen's going to turn dark. So the brain is like, dang it, I want to see my show. I want to be able to watch the show. So the brain's going to try to recalibrate into the pattern that creates the screen to go bright.
Yeah. So I'm trying to help Rona understand So basically, how I understand it is the goal of the feedback and coming back over and over again. Because in the beginning, if somebody has attention issues, and it could be because of stress or whatever's going on, that screen is going to go black a lot.
Yes.
And really, when they keep coming back, the goal is to not have that screen go black. When that screen, when you can watch a show straight through and be fully engaged, you're basically training your brain to basically be more in tune. Therefore, you're able to regulate your emotion. It's almost like metacognition. It's like learning to talk to yourself better,
Yeah.
to be able to focus more clearly and be able to not to self-regulate, not to react right away. It's like you're training yourself to self-regulate
Yep.
and build resilience as well at the same
Yes.
time.
Exactly.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that was perfect. Now, I'm going to tell you something though. The system is set. Our brains operate on a 75 to 85% reward system. So only 75 to 85% of the time are you going to get a positive reward. Because if you give 100%, you're not going to learn anything. And if you give below 75, it creates frustration and people give up naturally. That's with any type of reward system, not just neurofeedback. So as the person comes in and their brain gets better at reaching those thresholds of brain activity, the software automatically increases the difficulty. So you'll never ever get a full 30-minute session of clear, bright screen. It's always going to fade some, but that's also going to change according to the thresholds that we set in the software. So it's a whole, because that you guys aren't seeing that part of it, and there's no reason for me to explain all that part of it because it's a software algorithm of how often the person's brain activity gets into the correct pattern a certain amount of time, and so it's based off of that to give the perfect amount of reward to actually create a change.
Yeah. So if somebody is basically who has trauma and they're seeing a therapist or a psychiatrist at the same time, basically getting their brain to focus on processing better will help the psychologist and the psychiatrist give them the tools and treatments so they're able to understand. It could work in a negative way. You have to probably be careful because if your brain starts working in a really good way and you've kind of, let's just say, what's the word that I'm looking for? Disassociate the trauma where you totally blocked it out, but then all of a sudden it starts to come back.
Yes.
Then you have to be very careful,
Yes.
like, because then it could be detrimental to somebody
Yes.
and not advantageous, right?
Yes, exactly. And there is a certain protocol that we use for some people with trauma, but we have to work our way into that. And that's with an eyes closed part of the therapy. And it's more audio, visual, and no visual. And it can create some old memories to come up from the subconscious. And the conscious part of our brain tries to process it a little bit better. But if a person's not ready for that yet, then they could actually have some really negative experiences. So it's important for any of you that do want to look for a neurofeedback provider around you, that they do know what they're doing, and that one other thing is that they actually do provide a QEEG. There are neurofeedback providers out there that do kind of like a blanket neurofeedback protocol. I don't recommend those people because they're usually not trained in the scientific part of neurofeedback, which the QEEG is a lot of that.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So really your brain is like a muscle and you're really just trying to build that muscle up, so to speak.
And I like to say we're trying to create super highways in the brain instead of, if your brain's working too slow, the pathways are kind of like dirt roads. There's like not much going on back there, right? And then there's areas that are traffic jams. Those are the people that have like a lot of the anxiety and overthinking. And there's these pathways and all this information is trying to get across the hubs of the brain,
Right.
and too much traffic in the pathways. So we just want to create healthy pathways in the brain so the brain can process and function well as a whole.
Interesting. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah.
I definitely could see the benefit of it. I'm wondering that does it have any effect on sleep?
Sleep is one of my number one symptoms that most clients come. And I will tell you, when I talk about neurofeedback, like at conferences and stuff, sleep is the number one issue for a lot of people's mental, mind, emotional issues. Because a lot of people don't realize they're not getting enough sleep or proper sleep. Like we have people say, like, oh, I sleep fine. I sleep 7 to 8 hours a night, when in reality, they're never actually going into the proper sleep cycles. And when you're not going into that deep part of sleep where there's no dreaming and there's no lightness in your sleep, it's like when you're out cold, right? That brain activity is called delta, and that's what actually helps heal the brain physically and emotionally. So if we have a stressful day and just frustrated, and then we don't get good sleep, most likely you're not going to be able to focus the next day. You're going to be irritable, all of that. And that's because your brain wasn't able to clear out the toxins, the emotional toxins, the actual hormonal toxins that happen throughout the day from stress, like high cortisol levels. So if that just keeps building up, it just gets worse and worse. So sleep and brain injuries are actually two of the most causes of all the other issues in your brain.
So do you also provide like, is it just strictly this, or do you give homework like on for people, for instance, who might have trouble sleeping because they're ruminating on their things before they go to bed and their brain's out of coherence right now, it's
Yeah.
just a problem. Do you like help them learn how to breathe? Like you give them breathing techniques and or
Yeah,
any other things besides just doing that?
right. So
Neurofeedback?
we have a company called Heart Math. I don't know if you've ever heard of them.
Heart map,
Heart Math.
heart math. Yeah. Joe
They're
Dispenza
amazing.
is really big with them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're amazing. They're amazing. And it's actually using a form of biofeedback. If any of you are interested, you could get it right on your phone, and it comes with like a pulse, either like a oxygen one, no, not oxygen, the pulse finger one, or we have one in our office that's with an ear clip, and it's monitoring your heart rate variability, which has to do with how you breathe
Mhm.
also. It's the
Yeah.
pause between the heartbeats. And when you improve that, it has been shown to improve all your cognitive function as well. So that is one part that we provide in office, and then we recommend people go and purchase it. I'm not a wholesaler of it or anything. It's just a great company. Because I'm not a counselor, I try to be very careful on like recommendations, but even coaches and life coaches recommend things like journaling or gratitude. Of course, I recommend all of those great things. Through the aiming clinics, we do have some worksheets. There's one called Stomping the Ants. And ants are automatic negative thoughts that we all have every day, usually. And if we recognize those, then we could stomp them, and that helps us decrease some of that anxiety that some of us deal with. So there's worksheets like that. It's very customized. Another really cool thing you could purchase, if you wanted to kind of start to get into this kind of stuff, there's a company called Brain Tap, TAP, and it's not neurofeedback, but it is called brain entrainment is what they use. Yep, Brain Tap. It's really cool. It comes with an app, and it comes with these goggles and headphones that you put on, and you could select that you want to get more energized or more motivated or whatever. And you lay there with your eyes closed, and it flashes light. So if you have seizure disorder, don't get this. Or just do the headphone part. It does binaural beats and flashing lights, and it's an entrainment device for your brain, but it is not neurofeedback, so don't confuse the two. But that's another supplement thing that we recommend people do and get. And there's some sleep ones on there. It's a great company. Yeah, so
Awesome.
yeah.
Awesome. Does anybody else have any other questions? comments, concerns, announcements? This is good stuff.
Good.
Yeah.
I
Well,
hope everyone.
if nobody else has any other questions, comments, or concerns, it's 8:14. I'm going to give you back 45 minutes of your time.
Nice.
Yes. All right. Well, going once, going twice, 3 times. Okay, that's it. It's the cutoff.
That's
Listen,
it.
Melissa, this was great. You put your website in the chat. I highly recommend, if you guys are interested in finding out more information, please go there and check out what Melissa's doing there. If you're interested in a possible franchise opportunity, if you're a woman, because you have to be a woman
For
in
now,
order to participate in this, you can also reach out to Melissa as well. But it sounds like it's really great for kids. If you have a child that has, ADHD and you're not so big on the medicinal route, this is maybe something you want to check out. So, I got a lot of value out of this. I'm really curious to see how my brain's functioning. So
Yep, totally down.
I may have to visit one of your centers. I'm in New Jersey, so that might be kind of hard. But
Yeah.
you got
Right.
to get one. You got to get one up here.
I will be up in the Maryland area in October. I'm going to a conference and I do have a mobile system. So that might be something, we keep in touch and you could
Yeah.
always come on over. I don't know how far that is from Jersey.
Well, it's a little bit far away, but we can work it out. When time comes, we'll work it out.
That's
And
right. Maybe I'll
we're definitely gonna keep in touch for sure.
Yeah.
So thank you, Melissa. It's been great. And maybe we could do this again sometime in the near future. Okay.
Yeah. Anytime. Thanks
I'm
for
gonna
having me.
I'm gonna stop the recording.
All right.
Okay.